Hi there, thanks for joining me today. I have a flip through of a pretty little journal. Well, not so little. There's 228 pages in this young lady. And, well, she's not so young. um, and I thought you might enjoy seeing her page by page and seeing what I did inside her since I was unable to do a whole lot of videotaping of my work on her, as usually I tape as I go along. So let's start with the math. Oh, I have been fondly calling her Mrs. Fezziwig's party book, but she eventually just got shortened to being called Mrs. Fezziwig. I felt like doing a happy, Christmassy, but still old-fashioned Dickensy kind of book. And so I used a Dickens book, but it was Dombey and Son. And so the lace at the head and the foot serves three purposes. The head and the foot were falling apart. This book is between 1895 and 1902, and you might wonder why I'm giving you a range there. Many of the pages were missing from the text block of this book. It was literally falling apart, and there was no copyright date. If there was one, that's one of the pages that was missing. Fortunately, down here, the publisher did put their name. I looked up the publisher, and sometimes that can be a hint. And in this case, it was, because this publisher only published for a few years, between the years of 1895 and 1902. So that's how I know the approximate age of this sweet old book. It was red, it was Dickens, and it was just right, because you know me, I love to use old books that normally the next stage in their life would have been the recycle center and ground back into pulp. So instead, she now has a new life as Mrs. Fezziwig. And I've restored the spine from inside out so that we could keep it. I put just a little vignette on it with a Christmas tree on it. And I think she turned out very pretty. I try my best when I make my journals, I'll get this over with right at the beginning, to make my journals as much as possible from repurposed items for everything. The papers, the laces, the ribbons, the ephemera that I fussy cut out of books that I find at thrift stores. When you can find them in the children's section of my thrift store, you can get a whole Christmas book for like 79 cents. And I can't buy a bag of Tim Holt's beautiful ephemera up here for that price. It's very expensive in Canada and very beautiful. And obviously, those of you who know it, recognize this beautiful window. So when I can find it, usually it's on a trip across the border, I will partake once in a while. Who can resist? It's so pretty. So in this case, I have put a window on the front of this door, welcoming us inside to this beautiful Christmas scene. If you look carefully, you can see a mother with children, and they're all standing around holding hands and admiring their beautiful Christmas tree that's all aglow with candles, as was common in the Victorian time, and even as recently as my mother grew up in the 30s, and she had candles on her Christmas tree growing up. She did not have electric light, even though they had electricity in their home. To purchase lights just for a Christmas tree, just for Christmas, was money that they did not have to spare. So they had Christmas candles, and they had enough candles to light on Christmas Eve and on Christmas Day. And that's the only time of year that my mother and her siblings saw their tree all lit up and looking magical. And they still had a wonderful Christmas. So because I shortened it to I just kept calling her Mrs. Fezziwig, I took a little liberty and wrote Mrs. Fezziwig on the cover, but this is removable, so the new owner can take it out, flip it over, and name this journal whatever she wishes. And I say she because this is one of those rare times that Mrs. Fezziwig is actually going to be gifted to a friend of mine. So I hope you'll still stay for the flip through, even though she will not be going into my Etsy shop. But let's take a look through. I'm going to try not to talk too much through there. You pretty well know my style. If you've been following me for the past 5 years here on YouTube, you pretty well know my style of what I use. I will point out when something looks old, but I've created it to look old, and I will point out when something actually is old. So when we open her up, the opening spread, I think, looks like a party. I was inspired by the Fezziwig's party and this beautiful picture from A Christmas Carol. And there were only a few pictures that Dickens commissioned to put into his book, and this was one of them, Mr. and Mrs. Fezziwig dancing at the party that they threw for their employees on Christmas Eve. And I have a feeling that was not the only party that they would throw each Christmas season. The way they were described in the book, there's only 3 pages in the whole book where the Fezziwigs appear, and the description of them is just of a very happy, jovial, generous couple, and a very wonderful employer to work for, and lovely people to be with, whether at Christmas or any time. So I created a faux cabinet card, or carte de visite, and I found this picture of this lovely lady who's very Renoirish, as Mrs. Fezziwig is, and I thought maybe this is her when she was younger. And I see that she's holding a tiny little something in a frame, and that will play into this book a little bit later. I've backed it plain, rather plain, so that the new owner can write on it if they wish. And I've tucked it into a little lace pocket right here on the front. This is called a Dutch door, and on the other side of the Dutch door I have created a little, what I thought might be a card that would have gone out in an invitation, and then you bring it with you to the door to present so that you can come in for the party. And I used, this was actually underneath the Fezziwig's illustration, Mr. Fezziwig's ball. So I just thought I created this all. This was a blank wedding place card. So this little envelope can come out from these gold photo corners, but I'm not going to do it because it'll take too long. I did a little stamping there. This book I created was mostly intended to be a writer's journal, but I still had fun, as you can see, just going nuts with laces and trims and just making this look like a party. The edge looks like a party, and that was my goal. There is a variety of newish papers, still thrifted, and antique papers. This little card is vintage, and then this page is from a Bible that's from 1921. Let me write that down here. I know that because I use it frequently. And on one of the sides of the pages, it mentions the foretelling of the coming of Christ. So I thought that was appropriate from the book of St. Matthew. A little bit of ruffled lace here, and some tea-dyed paper here. This spread is very simple, but I liked it. It's got some, this was one rose that I fussy cut from some vintage wrapping paper. Victorians loved roses at Christmas and all year round, so I thought that was appropriate, and it made this more of a cohesive spread. This paper came from Nancy at Wishes and Weeds. She makes beautiful lace avocado dyed paper, and tea dyed paper too. And then more blank papers for the new owner to write on or do artwork on or collaging on or whatever she chooses. I tried to keep to a Victorian type style. The Victorians love to use scrap and then embellish it with laces and tinsel and sparkly things. So I did that as often as I could in this book. Here's the other side of that little page out of that little old Bible, and the other side of that little vintage card. This is a page out of a book. Like I said, you can use books and make your own ephemera if you don't have Tim Holtz or a craft store near you, or you don't want to have to pay what the cost is. I made it into a pocket, even though it is a menu. I imagined Mrs. Fezziwig entertaining a lot and deciding on the menu to give to her staff to create a delicious meal for her guests. So inside I put some recipe cards. These are scans. These are actual recipe cards that were in my mother's recipe tin back in the days when we would keep recipe card tins. And I do have her tin, which I cherish. So that's my mom's writing, and even her adjustments for the spices that she liked in her recipe for pumpkin pie, and then her recipe for pie crust. So I thought that maybe the cook, maybe the pastry chef for Mrs. Fezziwig would use those recipes for when they were entertaining. I couldn't use a lot of the original text block, even though I usually try with my books. So I hid it wherever I could, just as a little tip of the hat and a thank you to the book for letting me use it to give it a second life. So when you see paper that has printing on it, it's usually from the text block, which was, again, Dombey and Son. So this Father Christmas is coming out of the woods, but it's also Dombey and Son there, and a little bit of vintage trim here that may have been from, you know, one of Mrs. Fezziwig's dresses. She and Mr. Fezziwig, we never know what their first names are. In the book, they're just Mr. and Mrs. Fezziwig, which is kind of important to their character because Ebenezer would have been a very young man, and not, it would be inappropriate for him to refer to them as anything but Mr. and Mrs. Fezziwig and not call them by their first name in those times. This is a vintage invitation to a Christmas party that, you know, I found a whole box of them, but I aged it to look older. And I really like how it turned out. So it's wonderful what you can do with sandblock and ink and age it. And I thought a Christmas invitation, what a better thing to put in a party book. This is ledger paper. There's some ledger paper in here. I assumed that Fezziwig's kind of business must have been some kind of accounting house, because if Scrooge was apprenticing there, he was learning his craft, and of course his craft eventually became, he was a money lender and kept books of the money that was coming out and coming in. So when I tea dyed this, the lines washed away with the tea. Fortunately, the numbers stayed. I like the numbers the best, so I didn't mind so much. This is from a book on a children's Christmas plays. I've sewed some lace down the side. There's lots of sewing in this book. I've tied knots, but if the new owner wishes to trim them, she can. This can be a little tuck spot under here, and this is also a tuck spot here. This showed the proof that it was vintage I think from the 1980s probably. So I just covered it up with some old vintage paper. That little speck is going to drive me crazy. There we go. And a little bit of collaging here with another Father Christmas. And that's how they would have imagined him to look like in Victorian England. And a little bit of sari silk and a little bit of tea-dyed bridal lace from a wedding gown. Another Father Christmas on this side to take advantage of that sari silk that's hanging over the edge. I found this bookmark last week when I was thrifting, and it has holly and some little sparkly stones in it, and I thought that's the kind of bookmark Mrs. Fezziwig would have had, because she would have had a little bit of money. And so this piece, this fussy cut here is from wrapping paper that my daughter saved for me from her Christmas a couple of years ago. And fortunately, when I asked her to save me some, boy, did she save me some. And I'm cherishing every bit of it and fussy cutting. And I had been using it on my card so far this season, and this is going to actually be my last Christmas journal this year, so I thought I'm going to put it into Mrs. Fezziwig. So I've just put it on some blank old paper, and this is naturally aged. You can see the yellowing around the edge. Mother Nature did that, not me, and I like how that looks, and that's more room for journaling. On the back here, this was actually either like a calling card. It had a gentleman's name on the back. You can still see the indentation of the embossed name, Mr. Robert something or other. But I put on, this is actually a vintage sticker from the 1940s from a scrapbook that I found a couple of years ago, and I'm slowly parting with them in just the right journals. This is from a book called Old Christmas, and I tea-dyed it, and this is a party for Christmas Eve. Christmas Eve was usually the party night. Christmas Day back then was it was a religious holiday, so it was quite a solemn day. The partying went on the night before. Some ledger paper, some Christmas music, old Christmas music, the Wassail Song, and some old lace, again, sewn on, away in a manger here. I'm not sure the year of that paper, but it's old. Sometimes it suffices when I say it's old. A little bit of Tim Holtz that I spent some money on because I couldn't, who can resist? And I like how that turned out because they did have peppermint sticks back then. Here's a famous sketch painting of Victoria and Albert and their children. It's actually called The Royal Family up in the Nursery. Apparently they were well known for thoroughly enjoying their alone time with their children. She didn't like being pregnant, but she thoroughly enjoyed her children. And the two of them together just would rather do that than anything else. Just spend time with their children. And certainly England can thank Albert for bringing with him the tradition of bringing in a tree and decorating it. The Celts always brought evergreens and greenery and wreaths and that, and candles and that to celebrate the return of the sun for solstice. Sorry for that interruption. How dare someone come to the door at her house? A little bit of Nancy's lace tea-dyed paper, and this is from a book. I fussy cut it from a book I have on Victorian pastries and cakes. This is from a reprint of a Sears Roebuck catalog, and I imagined maybe Mrs. Fezziwig planning out her outfits for that season. Here's where I did some faux Victorian scrap. They loved to do things like this. They would have the little the little pieces of artwork that they would cut out, and then they would still adorn it with tinsel and ribbons and bows and little flowers and such. So I used some of my gold lace, and I put a gold star from my box of Denison stars, and I used my gold marker to give her a little bit of sparkle here and there. And then I put another little, some angels over here, so she's looking over at the little angels, and again some lace, and put a bit of gold on there. And another Christmas carol there, the Cherry Tree Carol. So here, this has a permanent bookmark that can be moved anywhere in the book, which reminds me, I didn't tell you, there are 7 signatures in this book, and it has a hidden hollow back spine. And I created new head and foot bands. The old ones, although I wanted to reuse them, I couldn't. So I created new ones in there. A little tuck spot because I wanted to use some lace to hang out the bottom, and it was able to hold a few things. Although it looks old, I made it look old. The tag itself is vintage, but I added a stamp and some napkin collaged on, and then a little present tag that I made look older and stenciled on. And then this actually is an antique postcard. So they're all tucked in there. I like this. It's a drinking song, and it sounds like Mr. Fezziwig would enjoy that. This is also from that book on Victorian pastries and cakes, and another vintage or antique, pardon me, postcard, Christmas postcard. Tiny little book I have that has little, they're not scriptures, but they are sort of little religious sayings, uplifting sayings. And then here is a page from a guest book. Well, of course she would have a guest book. And I put some fussy cuts on the outer wings here, but inside is blank where it says guests here, suitable for journaling on. And then I made a little tuck spot here of these 2 little sweeties. Maybe she had grandchildren eventually, and these look like twins, which would have been amazing back in that day. And just a little bit of decoration there. And then this as well is vintage or antique, I guess. And it came out of somebody's scrapbook. So I love that. And I love that, as I said, the Victorians, it's not necessarily poinsettias. They loved all the flowers to decorate for Christmas for their artwork. This one, this little sticker down here actually is vintage. And I cut this out of an old calendar that I had just to represent that the 24th would have been the night of all the parties, rather than the 25th. And so I just tucked a little tea-dyed paper in there. And I loved this tassel. I seldom use tassels in my journals, but I thought Mrs. Fezziwig would want tassels in her journal. So there's some more ledger paper, a little tuck spot created from a book with another Father Christmas. This is some really old music. Unfortunately, I'll never know how old. There was no date on the book. It was gifted to me, a happy gift, and it's German, so I don't even know if it's Christmas music or not. I just thought it was pretty. More tea-dyed paper here. And another vintage Christmas card, but not old, so I made it look old. Some more lace sewn on here. I like this one because it has green on it. This is the other side of that card, but I made it into a pocket. I wanted to include a little bit of religion because I would presume that Mrs. Fezziwig did attend church. And then I was inspired recently by Anna at Made by Granath, and also by Nancy at Wishes and Weeds, who made postcards and re-embellished postcards where the picture wasn't quite suitable. So again, here's some Dombey and Son in the background, but then a religious card on the front with the Christ child a little bit older, and his parents there, his earthly father there. And I love this one because it shows Joseph as an older man. This is some ephemera that I made. I call it faux ephemera. I have a real one like this that inspires me each year to try and make a few of these, because the real one that I have is just like this. It has the really pretty little Christmas, almost like a tiny postcard. And then it is surrounded by a little trim. And then the back has a separate blank card on the back for the writing of whatever Christmas message you're sending to a friend or family. And then a little rusty paper clip that I have added sari silk and a little ribbon rose, and I did the same on the back, so it's pretty when it's coming and going right there. And then here, this was a postcard, a prepaid for postcard. So I just added a little fussy cut from a book. Same with this card, was from a book. And then I Christmased it up on the other side with some tea-dyed music paper and some stenciling. This is a book I have on Victorian architecture, and I used a page from fireplace mantels. I thought that was appropriate. A page out of a different little Bible I have from the book of St. John, 1 John. And again, more fussy cutting from my daughter's Christmas wrapping paper from a few years ago. This was one of the few blank pages that was still in the text block from Dombey and Son. And again, more Dombey and Son in behind this sweet little lady, and some lace and some more of my daughter's wrapping paper. This is a scan from an actual perfume sample card that was tucked into my great-great-grandmother's Bible. So I don't often use scans, but this one's special because I have the real one and it's special to me. And this little cherub or cherubim down here, that is actual antique. That's not a reprint. You know, you can get those books that you can cut out. They're lovely and wonderful. Oh, there we go. Another Christmas card book. I loved these old Christmas card books because if you look closely up here, it says S and R, and you would keep track if you sent them a Christmas card and if you received one. And I'm quite sure there were some people that if they too often there was no R checked off at the end of the Christmas season, another one didn't go out eventually. You never know. And again, a little bit more cluster work here. I did sparkle this one up. It was cut out of a book, fussy cut from a book, and then I added some glitter onto it to make it a little more festive. Fussy cut this from one book, but I took the center out and put this picture on the inside because I thought maybe it was Mrs. Fezziwig when she's older with a grown daughter and a little granddaughter coming to visit her for Christmas. Oh, there you go. You can see what I mean, 228 pages. Now here I took out, I have several copies of the little version, the actual replica of A Christmas Carol. So there are only 3 pages where the Fezziwigs are talked about. So I took them out and I tea dyed them, and I thought they belong in this book so that you can read about how wonderful Fezziwig was and how just as wonderful Mrs. Fezziwig was. And a rusty paper clip with a little bit of lace up here, and I really like how that turned out. And I guess the new person can use it to make ephemera if they choose. Some more Christmas carols here that I've punched the edge so that it would fit in the book, but this is vintage ribbon here, and some more fussy cutting from my daughter's wrapping paper. It's beautiful wrapping paper. This mull was actually in the, still attached to the spine of the text block, so it went back into the book. And then I did a little bit of collaging. These two are from Tim Holtz, but this is from a book that I fussy cut out, this Father Christmas. So I got lots of different Father Christmases. They often dressed him in different colors. It wasn't always red the way we've come to think of Santa nowadays. Another Christmas card that is newer, but still I'd say it's vintage. It's not brand new, but I've made it look older by my sanding block and my corner punch, and by using distress inks. Same with this one, out of a book. Fussy cut it out and made a tuck spot out of it. And here's where maybe Mrs. Fezziwig or one of her daughters wanted to save these special curlers for doing your hair. So I used some faux cellophane tape and added a little bit of lace so that there's lace going up out of this book. There's lace coming out the sides. There's lace coming out the bottom. And like I said, I wanted the book to feel like a happy Christmas party. A little bit more Tim Holtz, but I aged this to look older. It looked way too brand new, so I inked it and I roughed up the edges a bit so that it looks more appropriate for the year. A little tuck spot there from a magazine. I cut that advertisement out of for these candles. And then I put in another blank piece of paper that I did a bit of stenciling on, and then a little bit of collaging up on the corner, and I just tucked that in there, but that can go wherever the new owner wants it to go. Another little tuck spot. This is from some scrapbook paper I have, and this also is just collaged together from a bunch of papers that I have, and some faux cellophane tape. Perhaps she was thinking of going to that place to get her cakes made that year. And a little bit more lace here. This little tag here that says thank you was with the holly bookmark. And more of the Christmas music, "O Come All Ye Faithful." And then in the back here where I made this pocket, I thought that looked like Mr. Fezziwig. I have a book of miniatures, the history of miniatures. And that's why I thought, another reason why I thought they were meant to be together, because she's holding something in her hand. And maybe it was this little picture of her dear husband who she loves so much. So Mr. Fezziwig's tucked in the back here. And then this bookmark actually is a scan. I have the real bookmark that was from my great-great-grandmother's Bible. And then I put on the back, of course, the Two Nanas bookmark. And this ribbon was on the thank you bauble. I've signed it here, CABC 2024. And then on the back is my little Sunnyside Journals sunshine there. So, and that is Mrs. Fezziwig's party book for this year. I hope you enjoyed this flip through. And if so, I hope you'll take a moment and leave a comment and say hi. And I'll say hi back at you. But as I mentioned, it won't be going into my shop. It's one of the very few times it's going to a special person. So I hope she enjoys it and fills it with lots of memories, and that it makes her Christmas a little bit brighter too. Take care, and we'll talk soon. Bye.